party's over.
Okay. Nice beer mug. I'll put this aside.
Oh, yeah, yep.
Lisa's beer mug.
Should be turned on. No, actually, this is actually live. But
That's on? Oh, okay. That's on. This is on? No. It's on? Okay. You want to turn it?
Turn it more.
Sorry.
That's okay. Here, you know what? See if I put it like right in the middle here. Test, test, test. Does that work
Check
a little
1,
bit?
2.
Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2.
Yeah, I see you coming through.
That's
You're-
good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Also with the crowd. Testing. There we go. All right. All right. Okay, if everybody could take a seat, we'll begin in a minute. CTN, you ready? Okay. There we go. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Mazzanti, and on behalf of Southern Connecticut State University, I'd like to welcome everyone to our forum. The forum today is Ready or Not Connecticut, the Millennial Generation is here, and the Gen Edgers aren't far behind. You know, I was tempted to start out with the sort of the proverbial joke about how a baby boomer, a Gen Xer, and a millennial all meet in a bar, but that just wasn't going to work because the baby boomer would probably rather be outside in a park, communing with nature and that sort of thing. The Gen Xer would rather be in a coffee house drinking a latte, and the millennial, well, you know, they wouldn't really see the purpose of an in-person meeting. After all, that's what texting is for. So we wouldn't want to do that. But the topic of the millennial generation is one that there's been a lot of talk about it. You read about it. Time Magazine recently did a big piece about the generation, and there are a lot of, you know, pros and cons and all kinds of comments about the generation. It is, in fact, the most studied and analyzed generation in American history. So So there are a lot of people who are very passionate about it. Now, critics will say that the millennials tend to have a sense of entitlement that previous generations didn't have. But advocates will say, well, that's just misunderstood, that it's really more of a self-confidence that they have that they developed over the years. Critics will say that the millennials want to come into the workplace and make a big impact right away and not have to spend 5, 10, 15 years climbing the ladder and so forth. And other people will say, the millennials themselves will say, well, that's not really the case either. We just want to be judged and promoted based on ability and not based on years of service. So there are a lot of pros and cons to it. And today we're going to get into all of those topics, as well as the whys. You know, what makes a millennial a millennial? And also, Generation Z or Generation Edge, which is basically the students from K-12, they are a little different too. They're changing from the millennials, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today as well. There hasn't been too much out there in the media about them yet, so we get sort of a little preview of what's to come in the years ahead. Now, after the keynote, and in a minute, I'm going to call upon our Vice President for Student Affairs, Tracy Tyree, to introduce our keynote speaker. After the keynote, we will have a focus group discussion, and the people mostly here in the front 2 rows will be coming up on stage, and we have a good group, and we'll talk about them a little bit later, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A after that. So, and also I wanted to thank a few people before we begin, and I don't know if he's here right now, but Patrick Dilger, who's the Director of Public Affairs, was very supportive as soon as we came up with the idea. He was quick to jump on it, so we're happy to have his support. Also, the programs that you got today were from Janelle Finch, who's one of our graphic designers. She did a nice job with that, so kudos to her as well. And a big thank you to Dr. Tyree for her support today. She really did help us a lot in getting this together. And her staff, Brad and Janet and Eric and Tom, have all done a great job with logistical support. And some of the other people, her staff and students who are helping today as well. So thank you to them. So at this time, I'd like to call upon Dr. Tyree to give the introduction of our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Could we take just a minute and really extend a warm applause to Joe? He acknowledged a lot of people, but he did the lion's share of this, from creating the idea to today's program. So could we just take a quick minute and give him our appreciation? I know it's going to be very exciting. I'd also like to extend a warm Southern welcome to all of you as we gather for this very engaging and timely conversation. It is great to have a multi-generational audience to discuss the clash of the generations. As I begin, I would like to give a shout out to some high school students who are in the audience. We have several students from the New Haven Academy who I believe are here with Laura Winnick, the director of the school's future project. Are our New Haven Academy students here? Well, hopefully they're still coming. We're expecting them. We also have students from the Cheshire High School here who are here with business education teacher Leslie Payer with the Cheshire Student Stand. I'm pretty sure they're here. Good. Go Rams. We're excited to have you here. Thanks for being a part of this with us. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the buzz around the millennial generation and probably know where you fit in the generational conversation. However, in case you're not aware of which generation you fall into, the back of your program that was handed out the door gives a descriptor. It lists each generation in terms of birth year and some of the commonly associated characteristics with that generation. While the experts slightly differ on their timelines, the general framework is if you're born from 1946 to the early 60s, you're a baby boomer. And I won't ask you to identify yourselves. Those born from the mid-60s to the early 80s are the Gen Xers. If you're born from the early 80s to the mid-90s, you're the millennials. And if you're in high school, you're a part of this post-millennial era, which some are calling Generation Edge. You know, most generations have pretty interesting names. There's the greatest generation, the baby boomers, the millennials. What happened to my generation? How did we get stuck with the name Generation X? Couldn't the demographers come up with a more interesting title? Oh well, catchy names aren't all they're cracked up to be. I'm honored to introduce you today to a very interesting keynote speaker, Kim Lear. She is an expert on on generational trends for Bridgeworks, which is a Minnesota-based company that seeks to bridge generational gaps. Kim is a writer, speaker, and consultant. And perhaps most interestingly, as a 20-something, Kim is a millennial herself. She regularly travels the country speaking to a variety of organizations about the differences that divide the generational gaps and how to bridge those differences. Just last week, Kim traveled to Las Vegas to make a presentation. Kim, I don't think we can compete with the glitz and glamour of Vegas, but we have a very different kind of glitz and glamour ourselves, an energy of inquisitive minds gathered here today, young in age and young at heart. We are very fortunate to have you with us and are pleased to welcome you to Southern. At this time, please give a warm welcome to Kim Lear. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Oop. Can everyone hear? Great. Just so you know, honestly, when I'm in Vegas, like everyone is in bathing suits and I'm in a business suit, so it's actually not fun at all. So I prefer New England anyways, so it's lovely to be here. Like they talked about, I work for a company that studies generations, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means for consumers and what that means for the workplace and academia and all of that. But just by the nature of what I study, everyone who works at Bridgeworks is always acutely aware of moments when maybe you feel a little bit older than you want to feel, or sometimes a little bit younger than you want to feel. And I had my first experience feeling older than I wanted to feel, and it was taught to me by my 6-year-old niece. But my brother and sister-in-law, they're the best parents, but they're the kinds of parents where they celebrate every single thing that their kids ever do. Some of you may be parents like that or have parents like that. I'm not judging, that's okay. But my brother and sister-in-law, it's like the first time their kid ties their shoe or gets on the school bus. It's like this huge momentous occasion. So as you can imagine, when their kid loses a tooth, it's like the circus comes to town. So they do this thing actually where when the kid falls asleep, they take a little bit of glue and put it on the kid's forehead and then sprinkle it with glitter so that when the child wakes up, it looks like a fairy has flown across their forehead. So if you think that's a little bit creepy like I do, then the takeaway from the presentation. So Isla, she's getting ready to go to sleep, and my brother and sister-in-law are in the wings, and they're so excited to make this big magical moment happen. And their older son comes up to them and is like, "What are you doing?" And my brother's like, "What do you mean, what are we doing? It's Tooth Fairy time. We did this for you, and now it's Isla's turn to have this great memory of the Tooth Fairy." And he's like, "She knows there's no Tooth Fairy." And my brother's like, "She's 6. She doesn't know up from down. How would she know there's no Tooth Fairy?" And he said, "She Googled it." And I was like, I'm 105 years old. So as you can imagine, Isla's generation already looks like an alien to me, and sometimes the millennial generation can look like an alien to boomers and to Xers and vice versa. And so that's really what we're talking about today. It's that when these moments happen on the personal front, they're sort of funny, they're a little bit painful, but when they happen in the workplace, when they happen in the professional sphere, when they happen in the marketplace, it can be more detrimental. And so that's really the dynamic that we'll talk about. And just to kind of set this up, we're only doing about 45 minutes where I'm just talking. And so I'm really just trying to set the groundwork of what is this study of generations. Joe said it so perfectly, where it's to say, well, what makes up a millennial? And then equally important, what makes up a Gen Xer? Why is that? What makes up a baby boomer? How do we all work together? Where do we all come from? And so we're going to look at some of these macro trends, some of these things that we're seeing happen in the workforce, things that we're seeing happen in the marketplace, and then understand what does that mean for this community? What does that mean for you if you're in high school? What does that mean for you if you're a professor? And during the focus group and during the Q&A, we'll be able to get more into some of those specific questions. What's so fun about this topic is that anytime you start talking about generations, has a perspective. Everyone has a point of view. Everyone has something to say. It's like the kid who drives you crazy, or the person who's stuck in their ways. You feel like, I mean, there's always some sort of passion around this topic. But it's interesting to me that whenever we're running focus groups, the conversation can get negative really quickly, where it's who had to walk uphill both ways in the snow to get to school, and who's an entitled little brat, and that's sort of the only places where we're allowed to exist. When really what we have found is that institutions, the organizations, the companies who take the time to look at the world through a different perspective, a different point of view, they're the ones who are able to harness this multi-generational workforce, this multi-generational community that we live in, and they have better communication, they have better relationships, and they can also have some fun together. And Ameritrade had some fun showing that relationship in a campaign that they released in the 90s, which was this campaign.
Stuart, I just opened my Ameritrade account.
Let's like this candle. Let's go to Ameritrade.com. It's easier than what do you feel like behind the extra page? So research. All the stuff is provided for you free of charge. No cost. Yeah, that's synonymous with free.
Let's buy 500 shares.
How about
100 shares. Okay. I'm thrilled. What that cost?
$8. $8. Live away in the future, my man. I can listen soda. All right, sorry. It's okay. We're having a party on Saturday night. You really want to go?
I'm going to try and get there. Happy trade. Thank you. All right, sir.
Who remembers this commercial? People, a lot of Gen Xers do. They're like, yeah, I know that one. So Ameritrade released this into the marketplace in the late 90s, and David Stillman, who's one of our co-founders, his background, he was an ad man, and he was one of the people who worked on this campaign. And when it got released, it went on to win a bunch of ad awards that year. It got this huge response from people. And some of you laughed, and so I want to open it up, and I'm just curious, what's kind of unexpected about it?
Generations are having a great time and they're teaching.
The generations are working together, they're learning from each other. It's the opposite of what we thought was going to happen. Yeah, because what did we think was going to happen? He was going to get fired. He was like photocopying his face. Thank God it was his face. But yeah, I mean, you see Stuart and see that young guy, and in 2 seconds you already have these ideas of what his work ethic is and what he's like, and then they create this magical moment. And when you think about how generations are portrayed in the media, it's almost always negative. I mean, that Time magazine article was rough. I mean, that was, for any millennials who read that, you must have felt a little bit beat up. I know that I did. And it doesn't really get us anywhere. It gets us in this gridlock of a conversation that is not productive. And so I think that a reason this campaign got so much traction is because it showed the positive. It showed two generations getting along and having a great relationship. And those are the types of relationships that we need to create in order to actually utilize this very dynamic community that we have. So let's start real quick on the ground level. And you were so polite that you didn't ask people to identify themselves. I'm not as polite. And so I like to get a little bit of a temperature gauge of who I've got in the room. And everyone should feel very proud of the generation they're from. We have traditionalists born before 1946 into a group of about 75 million. And do we have some traditionalists in the room today? Got a couple? Oh yeah, good. Great. And then boomers, that's 1946 to 1964, a big group of 80 million. Usually boomers are like on the chairs cheering for themselves. So this is, there you go, we got a proud boomer back there. And then Gen X, and they are 1965 to 1980. Got a lot of Gen Xers. Good, there's some Gen X pride back there, good. And then millennials, born 1981 to 1995. Wow. sometimes the millennials, it's like me and the waiters in the back, so this is awesome. Like a big millennial group here. And actually, there's a group of you, this is my first time ever presenting in front of Gen Edge, but if you are born after 1995, will you raise your hand? Wow. Oh my God, I have 200. Okay, wow. That's awesome. So this is our newest generation. This is Gen Edge. And does anyone feel like kind of they have 1 foot in one generation, 1 foot in another? They're not exactly in. Okay, there's a lot of you. So what that person is actually referred to in the first bridge where generations collide is that's referred to as a cusper. And what we found is that people who don't fall exactly into one of these boxes feel like they're not part of the generational conversation, when really what we found is that they play a really important role in terms of being generational translators, understanding that this is where Jenny was coming from and this is what this person meant, and you're sort of generationally bilingual. And you can add that to your LinkedIn resume and ask for a raise immediately. It's very marketable. The other thing is that it's not like someone goes to sleep on December 31st and someone else wakes up on January 1st and is a different species. That's not how this is broken down. When we look at generations, the academic backbone is looking at events and conditions of your formative years. So what that means is that your formative years, which is roughly your teenage years, you're coming to terms with the world around you. So what is happening in the world around you at that time, it has a lasting impact on how you view things like work, how you view things like collaboration, politics, leadership, social justice. Some of you are teenagers, some of you may have teenagers, and teenage angst, this is actually a study where teenage angst comes from this time, where maybe your whole life your parents told you to think a certain way, act a certain way, vote a certain way, and then you reach a stage where you're going to do it your own way. And that's the period of brain development that we study. And I also want to point out that this is logical, not psychological. So where psychology is looking at who you are as an individual, your unique brain synapses, your parents, where you're from, your religion, all of those things. So looking at you as an individual. A sociological study is we're looking at groups of people. We're looking at shifts. We're looking at changes in culture. So some of the things that we talk about, you're going to be like, that's so me, that's so my kid, or that's so my mom. And some of it is you're not going to. And that's okay. That's the nature of any sociological study. So just take away everything that is relevant to you within this. So these events and conditions, this is what really makes up a generation. And so we will start with the millennials. And we have almost all 82 million in this room. So let's, I just want to just shout out, what are some big moments that you remember from growing up? 9/11, absolutely. What else?
Getting the computer.
Getting the computer, yeah, absolutely. Getting into college, yeah, that was exciting. Well, it came up, but with millennials, we obviously can't talk about the millennial generation without talking about technology. And sometimes we accidentally think that we are the original tech kids, and I hate to be the one to break this to you, but we are not. Actually, the original tech kids, that's Gen X. They invented the computer, they brought the computer into the workplace, that is Gen X. They were playing Pong way before we were. It looked different, but it was still Pong. But what happened for millennials during the formative years is that the internet went social. And this changed the way that we do everything. It changes the way we speak to one another, the way we communicate, the way we lead, the way we work, the way we buy, the way we sell. But more than any of that, what it really changed was the rate of change itself. We grew up on an upgrade cycle. And I'll give you a perfect example. I'm older than most of the millennials in this room, so some of you might not remember this, but the first I ever saw, it was the Apple AE7. Does anyone remember this? Or maybe the Commodore 64? The total storage of this computer was 128 kilobytes, which is about the size of one tweet on Twitter today. So I have no idea what we're storing on this except Oregon Trail, that's a great game. But so this was the first computer that I saw. And then by the time that I was graduating from university, this computer had been turned into an iPhone that could download ringtones 10 times the size of the Apple AE7. So very massive, substantial change happening at a very fast pace. So besides, I know this is an old iPhone, but I'll update the picture. But so besides technology, another big piece that we look at as a big difference is the way that violence was experienced. Because every generation absolutely had their fair share of violence. For some, it was an ocean away. For a lot of Gen Xers and some of the younger boomers, it was streaming into your living rooms on the TV. But millennials, it's the generation of Columbine and Virginia Tech, Oklahoma City, 9/11. And it's different. It was the desks next to you. It was a different feeling of violence. When you look at public school education trends after Columbine, something interesting happened where there was an influx of money that went into the school system for things like guidance counselors. So I'll ask my dad, who's a boomer, if you got bullied in school, did you talk to your guidance counselor? My dad's like, what's a guidance counselor? Right, what you would call bullying, I would call Tuesday. So no, it's a very different view of that. But when you think about the implications of that, is that you've got 82 million young people who came up in the school system that had changed. There were teachers that were there for you. There were guidance counselors that were there for you. You were told to speak up. You were told to express how you feel. And that was a good thing, and it still is a good thing. But there were priests and rabbis and mentors and coaches and teachers, all these people saying that our voice mattered. And no one was doing that more than our parents. The parenting trend was very different. Boomers parented millennials much differently than how boomers themselves were parented. And it's an incredibly close relationship. And just to show how different this was, I mean, for a lot of boomers, when you went off to college, what did your parents say to you? Bye. Yeah, we got like laughter back there. They're like, see ya, right? And we're turning your room into a den, absolutely. So sad. And now, but boomers, I mean, that's not what you're saying to your millennial children. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But there is this different relationship. There's this closeness, extreme closeness between boomer parents and millennial kids. And it doesn't stop when kids turn 18 and go off to college. It really stays. And Google Chrome did a great ad that really depicted what that relationship looks like. And this is that ad. That it's so emotional, but how many of you have Skyped with your kids or Skyped with your parents recently? And it's very real, that connection and that relationship is very different. So as a result of some of these conditions, we have a generation that is, as of right now, they survey as the most socially accepting generation, very diverse, tech savvy, obviously, in search of meaning, very collaborative. And so there's a lot of good also, unless you've been living under a rock. You also know that there's some bad. There are some stereotypes out there, and we'll try to look at, well, where does some of it's not real, and then more importantly, it's what do we do about it as a community to make this better. So let's take a look at the other generations and who they are and how the millennials compare or bump up. And we will start with the traditionalists. And this is also, some of you may be familiar with Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation. This is who he's talking about. But we have traditionalists in the audience, and everyone is familiar with this generation. So just shout out, what are some of the big events and conditions that you think of when you think of the traditionalist generation? World War II? What else? Pearl Harbor? Yep. What? The Great Depression? Yeah, absolutely. Civil rights? Yeah, that was a little bit more boomer. No?
My mom was born in 42 and she was involved in the
Okay, all right, absolutely. So starting some of those, planting those seeds, definitely for rights, that's wonderful.
Test pattern on TV.
Test pattern on TV, okay. What? What, patriotism, absolutely huge. Yeah.
Well, I thought of
John Wayne and patriotism, absolutely, absolutely. This generation, they give us a lot of legacies. A lot of what we still know about organizations and about communication and about this country, it still really comes from this traditionalist place and this traditionalist mindset. One of the greatest legacies that they give to all of us is this great legacy of sacrifice. This was really a generation that understood that you set aside your individual needs in order to achieve the need of the greater good. Believing in institutions, they worked with institutions to create unbelievable change, put a man on the moon, create the highway system, come back from the Depression. Very loyal, patriotic, fiscally conservative. These are some of the traits of the traditionalist generation. But they also left a huge impact on the way that we communicate, especially in academia and in the working world. But they have a distinct style of communication in the workplace that was that top-down command and control style. And you all know what I'm talking about because you'll know the answer to this question. But if you are a traditionalist and I'm the boss, when I say jump, you say, how high? Yeah. Now you say jump to a millennial, what do they say? Why? Why? Yeah, absolutely. I hope I don't offend anyone with this story, but I was with a group in Vancouver recently, and I asked this to a group. You say jump to millennial, what do they say? A millennial in the back yells, screw you. And I was like, you're probably fired, kid. So that was, but yeah, definitely a different reaction. And again, not bad or good, but where does this come from? This different relationship and different view of authority. Well, let's talk about parenting. That was very different. How many of you grew up in what somewhat resembled a dictatorship, where it's like what your parents said, that's what happened? Yeah. Well, a lot of millennials, boomers parented pretty differently, and a lot of millennials grew up in a bit more of a democracy. I remember if I came home late from curfew in high school, there are high schoolers in here, so never do that. It's a obviously terrible idea. But if you did do it, you're like crawling through your weird basement window, you're like covered in mud, your parents are obviously awake, and they're like, I can see you. So I would come in and my parents are like, Kim, please come here. And we would sit at the kitchen table and they're like, how do you think you should be punished for this? And then we would come to a decision together. And that was how we would land on a punishment. And on a macro scale, we do a lot of work with the hospitality space. Last year, who was the #1 planner of family vacations? Kids. It's kids. Mom and dad are burnt out and stressed out. Mom's like, I want to play tennis. Dad wants to play golf. We want to go somewhere warm. This is our budget. Find us a few options. So you go to the grocery store. Meanwhile, your 12-year-old is on the computer. You come home. They hand you 5 options. You hand them the credit card. There's your family vacation. And we see a similar trend in the real estate space. There's something called the MLS click. It's the frontline click for buying a home. For buying a home. The #1 person who was clicking through that last year was kids. Because mom and dad are like, the school districts, you kind of know what we're looking for, just find us some options. So then millennials are catapulting into the workplace, and it's like you can come to the meeting, but you can't say anything. And they're like, dude, I just helped my dad buy a house, so I feel like maybe I should contribute. And so there's definitely this different idea of what is it like, what is your relationship to authority? And how this plays out on a macro scale, on a structural scale, it can be, I'll back up. But these millennials and their parents have this relationship where millennials were sort of playing consultant to their parents. And with the millennials in the room, it's like if your parents are going to Best Buy to buy a new TV, you're probably with them, right? I mean, you know more about it. And so it's no surprise that when millennials do come into the workplace, they want to have a voice, because if you've been playing that consultant role from a young age, it's expected, and FedEx played with that in this commercial.
Well, that's Kyle. He hates this fifth grade geography class. Is he another reason FedEx to ship global? He has to learn all the countries. So I brought Kyle as a consultant. Did you know that we have customers in Czechoslovakia?
Actually, it's called Czechoslovakia.
Yes, I've done that. Kyle, anyone would have heard of that new country called Pakistan?
I love that kid, Kyle. Okay, so on a structural scale, what this looks like if you're a visual person is that if you are a traditionalist or grew up under a traditional type of leadership, when you think about the workplace or think about academia or think about the world really, you see something like this, where the information's at the top and it funnels down accordingly, and people have the boxes that they fill. Well, millennials, and actually a lot of Gen Xers, when they think about the world, it's a little bit more like this. That network effect, more fluid, more agile, you can move faster. Daniel Gulati, he's a writer at Harvard Business Review, and he talked about this network, and he was saying, millennials are coming into the workplace and they view work as the physical manifestation of the virtual world in which they live. Which I felt like was a little dramatic, but it's an interesting thing to think about, that if you grow up in a world that you have access to who you need to have access to, and you can move at the pace that you feel is best, then why would that change when you come into the marketplace, come into the workplace, come into college? And this debate right here is, we could talk about this all day, but we can't, actually. So we'll keep this short, but we live in this half-changed world. Because the traditional hire has done us a lot of good. We would have gotten rid of it if we didn't need it anymore, but it's really stood the test of time. And I want to ask, especially people who are very familiar with that structure, what's good about it? I mean, well, what does it give? What does it give us? And just shout it out. What's good about it?
Direction.
Direction, organization, what? Structure, absolutely. Accountability, clarity, yes. You have a career progress. When something goes good, you have someone to reward. When something goes bad, you have someone to blame. Streamlines communication, absolutely. Some of the millennials and some of the high schoolers and stuff, what's good? What do you like about that network effect? What's good about it? Or anyone can chime in.
Sharing.
Sharing, yeah. What? Working together to achieve the common goal. I don't know why I can't find the person who just said that. Oh, there you are. I'm just looking all around aimlessly. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Egalitarian, yes, yes. Transparency, huge. You can get the information you need.
It includes inclusion.
Inclusion.
You get resources.
It's huge. It's huge. So, oh yeah. A challenge to change it is what?
The status quo.
The status quo. Oh yeah, yes, absolutely, challenging the status quo.
And I like being able to bring different perspectives and
Yeah.
kind of cross those lines.
Breaking down silos, bringing in different perspectives, absolutely. That's great. And this is a struggle that everyone is facing, because the hierarchy, it has so many great things that it gives that we need. The clarity and the streamlining and all of that. But we live in a world that is forcing us to be more agile and to move faster, to be more adaptable, to be more collaborative. And that network really gives us that. I'll just give you a quick couple examples of how some organizations have tried mixing the two. Google's 20% program, right now they're restructuring that program, but what it is that at Google, 80% of the time that you work at Google, you are doing what they tell you to do. 20% of the time, you do what you want. And it's during this 20% that you can go across into different departments, you can have access to anyone that you need access to as long as you can get it, and you have to be creative and to think differently and to work on a GChat came out of this, Gmail came out of this, the new fiber optics program, all came out of the 20% program. Intuit is another example. They have an intrapreneurship program, which is in the company, they have put together these pods of geniuses, basically, and these people are from different backgrounds and have these different areas of expertise. They come together with the exception of compliance and regulation. They are able to bypass all of the processes and procedures in order to push change through the organization. And it's an incredibly powerful program that has resulted in a lot of change. And so, when we think about even the world of academia, it looks very traditional. It does. It is a traditional type of atmosphere. But you can even see that in the world of academics, there are new programs and there are professors really finding their own ways to infuse that network into what they do and into their communication and into the structure of their classrooms. And it's interesting to see the evolution of what that looks like. So, even though when the new generations come in, we may think that we have the latest and greatest ideas, this traditionalist generation, with all the legacies that they give us, they are always a generation that can teach us a thing or two. Ooh. Sorry, we're going to speed it up a little bit. I don't want to cut short the panel at all. So we're going to move into our boomers, and we have a ton. So boomers, just shout out some of the big things, the events and conditions from your formative years. Woodstock, assassination of Kennedy, yeah, absolutely. What else? TV, civil rights. Moon landing, Vietnam, absolutely. The moon landing is there's an interesting generational juxtaposition that happens with this, because for boomers, when we say NASA, your first big memory is the moon landing, right? And what did that represent for you?
It represented being told that mankind had reached kind of a high water mark.
Yeah.
You had done something that was considered impossible.
Yeah. You had done something that was considered impossible. Just an unbelievable moment in history. And for Gen Xers, when I say NASA to you, what is your first memory? The Challenger explosion. So we're looking at the exact same institution. We're looking at the institution of NASA, but depending on your vantage point, you see it very differently. So it's sort of an interesting kind of generational lens moment. What else? We've got Woodstock in Vietnam. We've got Watergate. Watergate, yes, absolutely. Feminism, yes, women's rights. So the boomers, this is the generation actually that got me interested in generational theory. When you go back generations to thousands of years ago, it's very rare for a generation to actually see the fruits of their labor. And a lot of boomers did get to in some ways. They saw all of these fractures in society and they fought that good fight. And some of the rights that we can take for granted today, they didn't just come out of the clear blue sky. It came from this boomer fight. And this is civil rights and women's rights, voters' rights, an unbelievable time. They created this very strong youth culture. As a result, even in our most recent survey, boomers still are the most optimistic and idealistic generation. They they're also one of the most fiercely competitive generations. Do we have any competitive boomers in the room today? It's usually like a competition who can raise their hand the fastest. So where does this come from? 80 million of you. The world was not prepared for 80 million people. Some boomers remember there weren't always enough desks in school, not always enough books. There was the oil embargo. There wasn't enough oil to fill your cars. When you came into the workplace, there definitely was not enough jobs. And boomers knew that if you weren't willing to stay late, there were 80 million people behind you who were willing to stay late. So boomer work hours, you arrived 5 minutes before the boss arrived, you left after the boss left. That was a boomer's work day. And this brings up the work ethic debate, which we hear about a lot, which is these kids say they don't have any work ethic and they'll never work. And this is something that I talked about with some of the millennials earlier today. And what we talked about was it's not really a question of who works. It's a question of what motivates people to work. Because boomers, when you came into the workplace, you had all the motivation you needed. If you didn't work, you didn't eat. What did we say? When your parents, when you left for college, they were like, I'm proud of you, I love you, do not come home. And millennials, a lot of them have a little bit of that safety net. They can stay home with their parents. Statistically, millennials are getting married later, having children later, delaying large purchases if making them at all. And so therefore, some of that, the responsibility and the stability that was very important to boomers is less so for millennials. A big question that we get from senior leaders is, how come what motivated me doesn't motivate them? And it's true. And so let's think of, well, what does motivate them? And the biggest global connector that we have found is meaning. You think about the violence that was experienced. You think about a lot of millennials at this point have seen either their parents, friends' parents give their entire lives to an organization only to be kicked to the curb. And their boomer parents, boomers, what were you telling your kids? You were saying, if you're going to work as long and as hard as I have worked, it has to be about something you're passionate about. And millennials took that really seriously. So they're searching for meaning. Why does this matter? What is the impact that I can make, and what is the impact that this company or this institution has on the world? So, and wanting meaning in your job is not generational. Everyone wants meaning in their job. But what we're finding is that the other generations really understood you came in, you put your head down, you did the work until you ascended into a space where you had more meaning. And we're seeing 19-year-old interns come in on day one, and they want to know, why does this matter? Why is this important? Why is what I'm doing important? And I'll give you just a quick example of a company that did something interesting around this topic. A project that I finished recently was with LinkedIn. And LinkedIn, a huge portion of their workforce is coders. You know, they're people who are very far removed from the end user. And a lot of them are millennials. And they wanted to get their millennials they wanted to connect the dots for their millennials, explain how what you do matters. So, one of the annual meetings, they brought in a panel of people who found their dream job on LinkedIn, and they gave a very emotional testimonial about how different their life is now that they have their dream job. And everyone was more engaged. You could work in finance, you could be a coder, you could be the CEO, it didn't matter. And all of a sudden you were drawn closer to what LinkedIn actually does, which is connect great people with great opportunities. And so it's keeping in mind that motivation of meaning and why does it matter, and explaining that. So I'm going to keep this moving. So with boomers, sorry, we're going to keep going, but with boomers we talked about how that motivation is one of the bigger differences, and then during Q&A we can talk a little bit more about boomers and where they're at. We're going to hop into Gen X, and then we'll do a little preview of Gen Edge, and then we will be done. So Gen Xers, shout out some of the big things that you remember. The Walkman, yes. Arcades, yeah. Gen Xers, you remember MTV? Because I heard that they used to play music videos. That must have been an incredible time in history. So, Gen Xers, do you remember Jenny's phone number? Yeah. Can you tell me your kid's number by heart? Probably not. So that's kind of the difference there with Gen X. So Gen Xers, by the time the average Gen Xer was 20 years old, they had watched 23,000 hours of television. And on top of watching MTV when it was in its prime. This was also when Ted Turner invented CNN. So the curtain was lifted, and everything that was happening in the world was happening in front of your 12-year-old eyes through the television. And this was a time of unbelievable corruption. Every sector was being called into question. During one of my first focus groups when I was with Bridgeworks, a Gen Xer said, "You name the institution and I can name the crime." That was really how Gen Xers felt. And on top of seeing institutions fall apart on TV, there was also the institution of marriage was falling apart on the home front. During the Gen X birth years, the U.S. divorce rate tripled. So you have an entire home to empty homes. And they organized their own time, they put their own food in the microwave, they became incredibly independent. Even now, we'll ask Gen Xers, how to work, your ideal way to work. And they say, tell me what you want, where you want it, when you want it, how you want it. I'm gonna go away. Hopefully, you are about to go away, and then we can get it done. They are also a very skeptical generation. This is a generation that, while they were growing up, they saw a lot of promises broken. And Monster.com released an award-winning campaign that really spoke to the skepticism in Gen Xers as they were entering the workplace, and this is that ad.
When I grow up, I want to fly all day. I want to climb and live in the moon.
Sorry.
Baby, place and a wheel. I live around those. I want to be a yes man. Yes woman. Yes sir. Coming sir. Anything for a raise, sir. When I grow up, I want to be underappreciated. Eat a bus for doing the same job. I'll be forced into early retirement.
You don't know whether to laugh or cry. That's like an emotionally conflicting ad. But this really, that they spoke perfectly to Gen Xers and their sentiment coming into the workplace. The collision here that we'll talk about, and we can talk about some other pieces of Gen X later, but this fierce independence against that hyper-collaborative millennial. Because for millennials, even when you think about some of the messaging that we heard while we were growing up, it was 2 heads are better than 1, and 3 heads are better than 2. And do the millennials remember that sign, there is no I in team? Do people remember that? That was like a government mandate. Like, everyone must look at this through all of kindergarten. That was like the messaging that we were given. Gen Xers, they heard if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. So it's a totally different mindset. And different organizations and different institutions do different things in order to make this work. Because even physically, workspaces are changing. We're knocking down the walls, and people are working in these big collaborative environments, and Gen Xers are saying, I cannot work like this. I don't want to work like this. And so we have to think, where do both sides stand? I will tell the millennials in the room that when we are doing projects with Gen X managers, the number one question that they have for us, the number one thing that they'll say is, I totally understand how powerful they are when they are together. When they are collaborating, when they have access to each other, their networks, they are so bright and can do anything. I wonder if they can be effective, independent contributors, if they can be unique thought leaders. And I think that we can be, and I think that there are definitely places to do that, but I would say that in the workplace, one space where we see people get pushed ahead into high potential programs and where people fall behind is on this very thing, where Gen Xers are saying, can you do it on your own? And so it's stepping away from that security blanket of a group and showing your individual thought leadership, even if it's riskier. And then on the other side, for Gen Xers, it's about figuring out where is collaboration the most useful. Because collaboration is powerful, and it's not a leadership trend that's going to go away. It's an important part of leading, and an important part of communicating. It's trying to decide, where can we make the most of this, and where can it benefit our class, benefit our company the most. I can give you some examples and case studies of companies that do a really good job with this later on, but it's that collaboration versus that independence is a big piece that we see. So we will wrap up here. Sorry, we're going to skip a couple slides. Okay, we'll wrap up here very quickly with Gen Edge. And we have some in the room today, but I will say that, when we talked about those cuspers, how old are you guys? So 17, it's like you'll have some millennial traits as well. So, a lot of you are sort of cuspers in that sense. But the research on this group is not conclusive because obviously they're still in their formative years, and so we're still measuring what are the big events and conditions that are going to impact them. And I'm going to share just 3 trends that we are tracking to right now and how they're different from millennials. But the first trend here is lightning fast may not be fast enough. So Harvard started doing a study on the actual brain of teenagers. They started with 9 through 12-year-olds and have kept working with them. And for those of you who know about brain development, there's no such thing as multitasking. It's not something that any brain can do. It's switch tasking. So you do something, and then you stop, and then you go and do another thing, and there's a lot lost in between space. But the Harvard studies coming out so far are saying that these Gen Edgers actually lose significantly less in this in-between space than the rest of us do. And so for those of you who have young kids, sometimes it's like they're on the iPad and the iPhone and they're watching TV and they're on the computer, and you're like, can you just do your homework? And what this research is suggesting is they can do this. This is a function of their brain that other brains may not actually have. So that will definitely have some pretty drastic implications on the world of education, on the world of work, on the marketplace. So that's one of the studies and one of the trends. The next one here is face-to-face versus FaceTime. When the whole virtual world started becoming really big, virtual meetings and all of that, there were a lot of studies done to try to understand if human beings can create relationships through a screen. And the conclusion was basically no. There's something still very primitive about who we are. The way you smell, the way your eyes dilate, all of that, and people need that in order to create genuine connections to each other. But there's a study being done right now on young children and their relationship to their grandparents. Because what's happening is that there are some kids who maybe see their grandparents once a year, maybe twice a year. They might live in different states, live in different countries, but they're spending a lot of time with their grandkids on FaceTime or spending time with them on Skype. And so these very young kids who very rarely are seeing their grandparents in real life, they feel very connected to them in a very authentic, meaningful way. And so there are some theorists who are projecting that this may be the first generation that actually can build real connections with people through a screen. And that will obviously completely change the workplace and even the marketplace over the next 15, 20 years. The last one that we'll talk about here is a participation award is not a real award. So, I have a 6th place gymnastics trophy, so I was like, what? Gen Xers, for the most part, are the parents of Gen Edgers. And Gen Xers are known for their incredibly honest and unfiltered style of communication. They will be the first managers that make you cry, 100% guaranteed, like that's what happened to me. But they have a very direct style of communication. And we're actually seeing that that direct style of communication is exactly how they are speaking to their kids. We were doing a focus group with a bunch of Gen X parents, and one of the Gen X parents said, yeah, if my kid comes downstairs and is like wearing weird clothes, I'm like, honey, people are just gonna make fun of you, you're not gonna make any friends, you need to go change. And it's just being totally honest with them, and when we are talking to 12-year-olds, their knowledge of the recession is unbelievable. Their parents are not sugarcoating things, their parents are telling them, money doesn't grow on trees, student loans exist, this is the world we live in. And these kids know that they're not just competing for jobs with the people sitting next to them, they're competing for jobs with kids in China who can do what they can do, maybe better and for less. And they are more competitive. They have a competitive spirit that where millennials, we have this very collaborative spirit, these Gen Edgers are more competitive. And so that is going to have a huge impact on the way that people work and what they're motivated by in the future. So I know that some people have to go and get to class, but by all means, if you have to leave, I'm sticking around obviously for the panel and everything. I saved my favorite commercial here for last. And this really just celebrates how, even though we all come from these different places, we all do, we're more similar than we are different.
May your wishes are free. May your hands do for
next part of our program now, the focus group discussion. And by the way, and we're going to ask the focus group members to come up in a minute. When they do speak for the first time, we would ask that you identify who you are and what organization you belong to. So CTN, which is covering it today, can get the little subtitles so we have your ID on camera. We are delighted to have with us Amanda Rouse from Channel 30, who is going to be the moderator for the focus group discussion. Amanda has been a reporter with Channel 30 for the last 6.5 years. She's been stationed in the New Haven Bureau for the last few years. She's a general assignment reporter. And on occasion, I have seen her filling in on the anchor desk as well. And it's a seamless transition. It's like she's been there forever. So I think she's got good things in her future. She occasionally, also, I should say, she worked for WSHM in Springfield, Massachusetts before she came here. And prior to that, I think she got her start at News 12, right, as an associate producer and a reporter. They're based in Fairfield County. She's actually a Connecticut native, grew up in Monroe, Nassau High School graduate, and she's also emceed a number of events, some charitable organizations, the Walk Now for Autism Speaks in Waterbury, I believe. Right? So at this time, first of all, I'd like to call the focus group up to the stage. And we have the chairs over here. As you can see, we've got faculty, we've got students, we've got a couple of high school teachers and students, as well as some business professionals and a representative of the Connecticut PTA, so it's a good cross-section. So at this time, I'd like to call upon Amanda, if we can give her a big round of applause for being our moderator today.
Thanks, Joe. And Joe, I actually have my little microphone on here, so I don't have to do that. Joe set up everything for, I think, all of us. So, a big round of applause for him again, because he kind of explained it all to me how it was going. Let me just tell you who we have here. I'm just going to run down the list, and I apologize if I butcher any names since I'm meeting most of you for the first time today. We have James Accomando, Government Relations Vice President for the Connecticut PTA. We have Dominic Allegrini, Cheshire High School student. He's a sophomore. Enrique Baker, an SCSU freshman and member of the university's Organization of Latin American Students. Rosemary Conforti, an SCSU Associate Professor of Media Studies. Julie Daly Meehan, Executive Director of Hartford Young Professionals and Entrepreneurs of Metro Hartford Alliance. Steve Gentile, Chairman, Pulse, and also the Young Professionals Organization of Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce. We have Norris Haynes, an SCSU Professor of Educational Leadership. Karen Johnson, North Haven High School Psychology teacher. Owen Kennelly, Cheshire High School student who's a sophomore. Julie Liefield, the Director of the SCSU Counseling Center. Patricia McCauley, SCSU Senior, a Communications major. Jane McGinn, an SCSU Professor of Communication. Aaron McGuckin, SCSU Senior, President of the Student Government Association. Leslie Pear, Cheshire High School Business Education teacher. Judith Resnick, President, Connecticut Business and Industry Association's Education Foundation. That was updated. Is that Executive Director? Sorry. I was like, oh, I knew I had that note somewhere. We also have, Dean Robinson, SCSU Instructor of Communication. Christina Sanzari, North Haven High School Senior. Peter Troiano, SCSU Assistant Vice President, Dean of Student Affairs. And Francis Vigiani, a SCSU Assistant Professor of Management. So what we're going to do is, for this forum, we have a couple of questions that we're going to ask them just based on, the presentation that we heard. And then we're going to open up the floor to have some questions from you guys, because I'm sure that you have a lot of questions. So let's see. Now let's first start off with, I guess, we just heard that Kim had a very insightful presentation and talked about so many of the different generations, but one of the big thing obviously is millennials. So we want to talk to maybe some of the millennials that are sitting with us today, just about, the different thoughts that you had about the presentations and, maybe some of the, comments that really showed where the millennial generation is succeeding, and then maybe some of the criticisms that they might have at the millennial generation. So I know that we have Stephen, Aaron, and Enrique are students. So whoever wants to take the floor, just stand up, introduce yourself so we know who you are, and take it away. Any volunteers? All right.
Hi, everyone. This is on.
Hi.
Cool. My name's Erin, and I'm a senior, and I'm the president of student government here at Southern Connecticut State University. I actually think Kim did a really fantastic job summing up the millennials. A lot of the things that she stated they hit really close to home with me, and with a lot of the people that I interact with on a daily basis. I had the opportunity to talk to one of the snooze reporters, our Southern newspaper, and she asked my opinion on millennials before this, and I had a really hard time coming up with one opinion, because I think so many of the opinions that all of us have heard are true, where there's the aspect of laziness that's viewed from us, where maybe we do things a little bit differently and on our own time, but then there's also we are so strong in so many other areas like technology and the networking aspect. So I really think that she did a fantastic job summing all of it up. Me personally, I think that I'm a little bit different with millennials. I think that I'm a very independent type person, so I think I fit in a couple little different areas, but I really felt that a lot of the connections that Kim made to the millennial generation very well suited my life and the people that I interact with on a daily basis here on campus. Want to go next?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Enrique Baker. I'm representing OLA's Organization of Latin American Students. I have a negative sentiment against my generation. I come from North Haven High School, which is a nicely furnished, everyone comes with money and people are given cars and given things, and that's not the way I grew up, but it is the way that I view our generation, that we do have this sense of entitlement. So I'm here today very interested in how we can be marketable to employees, to employers, and how we can expand on that.
That's a good point. Anyone else want to, or we can move on to the next question? No? No takers? Okay. The other things that we're talking about, and this is more for, the college faculty and staff, we have, what have some of your experience been like dealing with today's college students? Because obviously there probably have been some people who have dealt with kind of different generations being part of the staff. What would you say are some of the major differences you've seen? And also, do you really have to, cater your teaching towards the different generations? Because I've noticed that a little bit too.
Hi, I'm Francie Vigiani. I'm a professor of organizational behavior in the business school, and I'm amazed that I'm actually standing up and saying this, but I am. I'm a boomer, and one of the things about the boomer generation was the women's movement. And I found in business school classes over the last 20 years or so that my ability to speak to across the generations about what I thought of as gender issues has really disappeared. And I'm fascinated to try and, I've really gotten curious about this. And if anybody wants to talk to me afterwards and give me some advice about how I can do this better, I'm very interested in that.
Hi, I'm Roken Forty from Media Studies. I was delighted to hear that Kim said that our Gen Edgers we're going to close that gap a little bit in terms of how fast we can do things, because what I'm dealing with, and I think in the classroom, and maybe others are as well, is the idea of our students, millennials, do believe they are incredibly fabulous multitaskers. And the studies show that actually you're not. I'm so sorry. So that, and I think some of the statistics bear this out, it's that in the workplace especially, we are interrupted every 11 minutes approximately by an email, phone call, or someone coming to the door. It takes 25 minutes to refocus back to where you were. So you do the math and figure out how productive we can be, any of us can be. And that leads me to the distraction and inattention issue that we have due to media and technology that come from the media perspective. And the idea that we can watch television, read a magazine, study, text, and and eat, because that's the other thing we do. We eat with a book open. Sometimes that's studying. That's not really working either, because, as you said, and anyone who's studied economics knows, every time you shift, there's a cost. Every time you make a change, there's a loss somewhere. And that's what I hope the students start to look at. What are they losing? And from my perspective as an educator, it's the ability to pause and reflect, whether it's on an idea, a problem, or a relationship. And I think that that is still needed in order for us to be human. I really do. I think we have to be able to take that time.
I'm Jane McGann. I'm a professor in communication. Some of my students are here, I'm proud to say. I teach 2 courses in online communication, and so part of what we've been doing all semester is just looking at how we communicate online and how much information is communicated to us online. So I did a little experiment with my millennial students, and yes, we know multitasking is switch tasking. We've discovered that. They didn't believe it till we did it. But one thing I noticed being a boomer, we did a series of exercises, and they can switch tasks 10 times faster than I can. Every single student who was in that Millennial Generation are so much faster switching back and forth. And that was impressive to me, because the fact that they can do it so much better makes them think they can do it all the time. But we've learned they miss things. But it's been a challenge, and it's been fun teaching millennials to me. I have to say something positive, because it's made me be much more creative as a faculty member. I have to be multimedia. I have to be relevant. I have to be relating to their lives. But I'm also trained because I have a Gen Ed or millennial at home.
There you go. We have one more.
I'm Norris Haynes, Professor of Educational Leadership. I really appreciated the 2 dimensions you talked about, the sociological and the psychological. And so there's an intersection, I think, and I see that play out among the students I teach. I tend to teach more graduate students than undergraduate students. But I think as we know, the environment influences who we are and shapes us, and we also influence the environment and shape the environment. So I think that we do see across generations some adaptations that embrace elements of all the environments each generation has grown up in. And so I kind of prefer to look at things as intergenerational environments, and how those environments influence how people behave and the impact on others. But perhaps we can talk about the kind of emphases that we see among different groups of people from different generations. And what I have observed is that the millennials and the General X's, but particularly the millennials, tend to be less, perhaps, patient in sticking to a task and following that task through in order to sort of, there is a sort of perhaps a desire for an instant solution. And therefore, a very important element, I think, that's so critical to learning and teaching, whether it's face-to-face or maybe via the distant learning, is the ability to self-reflect. What some people call the higher order thinking skills, being able to monitor how you learn and being able to learn from mistakes you make along the way and then adjust how you learn. And I think perhaps that's an area the millennials may need to do some more work because of the instant need, instant gratification that they like to see. However, let me also say that I think there's a lot that a baby boomer like myself can and have learned, that I have learned from some of the millennials, and that is tasked with behavior and adaptations.
Yeah, a lot of working together. Did you want to say something quickly, and then I'll move on to the next question? Go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Peter Torrell. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Youth Students here at Southern. I just wanted to say that we see some of these issues that we're talking about today, and thank you very much for being here today. We see a lot of this playing out outside of the classroom as well in the personal lives of our students, and probably the area where we spend most of our time changing the way that we do our work with students is in this area of not just communication, but conflict resolution, and how students are working out conflicts both among themselves, so with their peers, but also with their faculty, with their staff, with their parents. We have spent a lot of time kind of puzzled by the new ways that students are resolving conflict, but learning from that as well, and again, modifying our work with those students. We spend a lot of time with the parents. One of my favorite months of the year now is June. We do 5 orientations here, and we spend a lot of time talking to the parents on the first day of our new student orientation, and we've really had to find ways to talk in very positive ways, because there's a lot of positive things happening, but in very positive ways about the changes, and not focusing on the frustrations that these differences cause, but on what we can learn from that, and how we can grow and how we can be better professionals from that. So we think it's great. We think our millennial students are great, and they're continually a challenge for us.
Moving off that point, what you said about the different conflicting generations and kind of, I guess, expectations and moving in with that conflict, I'm going to kind of put Judy Resnick on the spot, who has dealt with a lot of human resources professionals. A woman close to my heart, because I grew up with a human resources mother, so I was told what you should and shouldn't do in the workplace. But how has everything been, shaped by these generations? Are you seeing conflicts? Do people not maybe communicate with each other or communicate differently? And how have you addressed that, kind of generational gap when talking to business leaders?
First of all, I come from the state we do a lot of thank you. We do a lot of surveying, and I'm reporting, I'm not judging. Many of our employers, and we have over 10,000 members, tell us that they're very frustrated today because they put their finger on they call them soft skills, we call them professional skills, the work ethic issue. And why don't they come to work on time, and why are they on their cell phone, and why are they online when they should be doing their work? So we hear a lot about that, which I think in some senses for our employers, we hope becomes an opportunity. And some of the things that as I talk to both employers and their HR professionals, we look at how can we bridge that gap, and what are some of the ways that we might suggest to them. These are opportunities. And Kim, I have to honestly say, you've been in my house. I'm a baby boomer, and I have sort of millennials they're really Gen Xers, but sort of millennials. You know me too well. It's very scary.
I was actually in your house after I did the research. I was secretly
and actually, I must tell you, in preparation for this, I actually called my son. He is a manager at JetBlue, which for many of you know is a very interesting environment. Their culture is very different, and I asked him the very same question. What do you see, and what are you doing about it? And he talked a lot about the need, and he very directly said to me, you told me I was competent, and I come into the workplace, and I need some of that validation. I need to know that someone recognizes that I have competence. He said, so they have a program called LIFT, which is a public acknowledgement of people that have done something right. And it's, in manufacturing, when you talk about lean, the object is always to catch somebody doing something right. So he said that's an opportunity for millennials to hear that, in fact, they're not just a cog in a wheel. Some of the other things they do is very directly, as projects are going on, is they say to them, here's how this relates. Here's what your part does. Here's how you contribute. And the last thing he talked to me about, which I thought was very interesting, is and we hear this from employers all the time, is people walk in the door, our interns walk in the door, and they think she should be a vice president. And he said, it isn't so much that our employees need to know that tomorrow they vice president, they need to have some clarity and visibility about what a career path looks like. And in many of our organizations, that is not apparent. It's more so perhaps in higher education, where you have a career pathway in academia, from an adjunct to an associate and on up, but it usually isn't in the workplace. So I think the difference is that we hear so much frustration about when posed as opportunities for employers to take advantage of a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of skills. I mean, the first thing I do when I can't do something on my computer or with my iPhone is talk to my kids or talk to somebody that's in their 20s. They're wonderful resources. So I think I look at this, and yes, I'm a baby boomer who's optimistic. I look at this as an opportunity to encourage employers to recognize that we're all quite talented, and the object is really to find out what you and I both do well and figure out what are the best conditions under which to make that happen.
We're going to put someone else on the spot. Jim, where's Jim Acamundo? That's you? Okay, you're next. So what we'd like you to address, if you could, is that, we heard a lot, and I think you touched upon this a little bit, Kim, about like a different type of parenting that we see now, like kind of these helicopter parents. And if you guys haven't seen the Black Hawk parents, Black Hawk, okay. If you've seen that movie Parental Guidance, like it makes me laugh because I didn't grow up with parents like that, but I hope I'm not, who knows. But, talk to me a little bit about, how those relationships, being both on like the PTA and being a parent yourself, how you kind of seen that change. And, as Kim mentioned, like the relationships change too, because kids are very close to their parents now.
Oh, exactly. Thank you. I'm Jim Commando, and I'm affiliated with the Connecticut Parent Teacher Student Association just off the street. The hovering parent has been around forever. They just got a new name recently called the helicopter parent, the overbearing parent, the obsessed parent. You can kind of pick your name. It's probably many of us that are here. I have a millennial at home. He's actually at the University of Richmond right now, and I also have a redhead who's a generation edger, and edge fits her personality perfectly, so I can't wait to tell her about the new generation. As far as the overbearing parent, the helicopter parent, whatever you would like to name it, that individual actually, I'm going to take kind of the positive spin from that, is raising their child in a completely different world than they were. I'm a baby boomer. Parents virtually said, thank you, when you went away to college and I was 3,000 miles away, we'll see you when you graduate. It was the same thing when you got home from school. We'll see you when the streetlights come on. And you organized your own sports and activities. You brought the ball, somebody brought the bat, somebody brought the gloves, and you played all day after school. There was nothing organized until you got later in middle school and high school. Try doing that to a child today. He'll be the only one at the playground, or he'll be kicked off the playground because there's no free space left in town because every single thing is scheduled. Your entire day is scheduled. Try doing some sort of haphazard activity. So the helicopter parent is almost a parent of the environment. So we are over-programmed, we are over-scheduled. I'm not suggesting that's a bad thing, but it certainly is a different generation that's entering the workforce. It's a different generation that's in college, like my son and his friends. But I will tell you, I think it's a terrific generation. My son is the one that sets up all our technology in our house, and that's something I could not ever do. So I certainly didn't helicopter or overbear that. But I will tell you that the children today are competing in a totally different world. It's not working at the retail store that's down the street in your town. That retail store or environment doesn't even exist. It's not working for the businessman who actually was in your town, because that doesn't even exist. These kids are growing up in an international awareness, the old global economy, to unfortunately reuse the phrase. It's a totally different world. So when they get on their computers or they use their technology, which is exactly how my daughter does her homework with 5 things going on at once, and I never know if the homework's being done, but she comes home with the A, so obviously somewhere in there it's getting done. That's the type of world that the millennials are facing. So I'm hoping that through all, and when we talk about the social network, we have all the interconnected dots as opposed to the organizational charts that I grew up with. That's what they're being prepared for. The teamwork, the sharing. Yes, they got a trophy in many cases for showing up, and they're probably waiting for that trophy to be at their office when they're ending up in a cubicle, a shared cubicle, and virtually they have their own workspace, which is their docking station, if you will. But I think they'll adapt well. I'm very, very confident of this group. I think in many cases, and I'll end with, for those parents who maybe like myself, who live next to the elementary school and are self-employed, spent the 12 years reading to you guys or being involved in going to your Washington, D.C. trip. The only parent on that trip is standing right here for my son. My daughter doesn't even tell me when there's events anymore at school because I show up. There is a 10-step program for us. And when you actually go on the internet and you look at helicopter parent, and the thing that pops up is a 10-step program to not be a helicopter parent, that's when I know we made it.
I think you're right. You're also, really getting them ready, I guess, to deal. They have so many activities now. They're getting ready to be able to do that in the business world. Kim, you wanted to add?
I just want to give a resource because I think that what Jim, okay. What Jim said, that millennials and Gen Edgers are growing up in a different world. It's a different competitive landscape, and what they're going up against is different. There is a talk that Thomas Friedman, he's a columnist for the New York Times, he wrote The World is Flat and all that. He gave the keynote address at the Teach for All conference in China this year, and I think that the new landscape that kids have to grow up in is an overlooked part of the conversation of generations. And if anyone in here is interested in it, I would encourage the millennials in the room to look at this speech. It's called The End of Ordinary, and it was Thomas Friedman at the Teach for All conference, and it talks about the new landscape of childhood, and it's I thought it was absolutely fascinating, and I think that it would be helpful for millennials, definitely.
We're going to now turn it over to maybe some of our high school students. If you want to talk about the Gen Edge, I don't even know all these generations yet. The Gen Edgers. Talk to us a little bit about, how do you think, I guess, you've been hearing a lot about the millennials, you'll be hearing about, Generation X. What do you see as, the differences between, what we've been talking about a lot and what you see with, your classmates and yourselves? Who I need a brave soul. Who's going to be the brave soul? You're going to do it? All right. Can you pass that down for me? And just give us your name.
Should I stand up or sit down? All right, well, I'm Dom Greeny, and I agree a lot with what you guys are saying, and a lot of kids are like that. Technology's increased a lot, and a lot of kids know how to use it. There's not many kids I don't know, all the kids I know have smartphones now, so that's a big thing. And just basically all the kids, some are a little lazy, they don't really want to do much, but just a lot of technology and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, good job, good job. Awesome. I feel like though, can't we say that in whatever generation you are, that there was always that kid that might have been lazy, there was always the overachiever, no matter what generation you are, in your classes, it was just, there was always someone. Let's talk to you, and again, just, volunteer. Oh, you want to add something more? Okay.
Well, as Owen Kennelly, as he talked about how his daughter is doing her homework but doing everything at the same time along with it. So I'm gonna have to say, I agree with that. Last night, I found myself working on a project for my World Lit class, and while I was doing this, I was watching TV show The Walking Dead, working, texting on my phone, and listening to music all at the same time while I was working on this project. And I don't know, I was going with that.
We want to see what grade you got.
Thank you, Owen. I appreciate you trying. I'm going to try to help here. I think it's great. And again, I'm going to go back to the switch tasking. No, you can't, actually. Because I just want to, there are studies that show that when you do this switch tasking constantly, again, the loss is, and maybe this will hit home a little bit more, is the grade. That once you have been interrupted, actually you perform 20% less than you normally would, and the difference is between a B- and an F. So I'm just going to put that out there. That's an 80 and a 62. So until you become a Gen Edger, maybe Dom and Owen have some chances, but right now we really do have to pay attention to the cost of switching.
Oh, yeah. know what? Do I skip over these two?
I'm Leslie Pear from Cheshire High School, and these are my two students over here, Dominic and Owen. From a classroom perspective, what we're trying to do is work with the younger students in terms of coming up with what works for them and how they can accomplish what they need to accomplish. We're teaching them along the way, so maybe, Owen, you won't do quite as many things next time you're working on your World Web project or homework in some of your other classes, but they are multitasking, and I'm trying to, in the classroom, just work with that. And with the technology that they're using, they'll bring some of what they've seen and what they do into our classroom, and that way they add value. As a teacher, I can't research all of the different sources, so they're bringing stuff to me, and I'm able to utilize that, and that's really nice. Yes, they do show me how to use different types of technology, and I appreciate that as well. So we're trying to work together with what we do now. As it relates to the real world, the business world, the skills that they learn, I do want them, and we talk about this in class. In one of my other classes, I said to the kids, we have 5 minutes at the end of this class. If you want to take a break, we've been going full steam ahead. If you want to take a break, you can do that. But I said, no technology. So nobody could take out any of their iPhones, iPads, and not talk to each other. Because I don't want any of our, whether you're Gen Edgers or Millennials or any generation, to lose that common interaction with people, the importance of looking someone in the eyes, the importance of a strong handshake, the importance of just, natural, common conversation that's really going to take us, whether you're, the younger generation or any generation, from where we are to where we want to be.
Thank you. Our last question before we open up to questions here. Do you want to applause? I'm looking at you. I saw the hands go like this. Our last question is, talking a little bit about what we heard Kim say, a little bit about work, like work ethic. And I'm going to ask Steve and Julie, if you guys could weigh in here. What would you guys say, being young professionals, that would help, both employees and employers succeed in business, dealing with all of these different generations?
Thank you. I'm Julie Bailey-Meehan. I work for the Metro Hartford Alliance. We are essentially the Chamber of Commerce for the Greater Hartford region, so we're the convener of the business community throughout the Hartford region. And I run HYPE, Hartford Young Professionals and Entrepreneurs, which is essentially a networking group that's part of the Alliance for young professionals throughout the region. As you guys noticed in these slides earlier, the Millennial Generation is considerably smaller than the other generations, so it's important for us to retain that group in our community and make sure that they're happy here and they continue to help us progress as a region. So that's kind of why HYPE was created. We've been around for about 7 years. We have over 4,000 members. We host about 60 events a year. And I was in a unique position recently to see that one thing that is really important for everyone to remember, regardless of what generation you're in, is communication. Communication is extremely key, and it's important to not assume that your method of communication and the way you prefer to interact with people is the only way that it's possible to communicate with people. It's much more effective if you're able to kind of break down and take the time to figure out the best way to communicate with the individual that you are communicating with right now, not having one strategy throughout. And I just have to share one anecdote that I thought was hilarious for me last week. So our leadership team went to Vermont on our annual retreat to lay out our priorities, and we're all millennials, and one of the things HYPE is trying to do is to connect our members to Alliance members more often. And we said, okay, how do we do that? Because it's really intimidating to walk into a room as a young professional with all of these business leaders and kind of go up to them and start talking. So we kind of talked about that for a little while. Last Friday, I was in a meeting with strategic partners of the Metro Hartford Alliance. These are the investors. These are the Alliance members, and they said the same exact thing. They said it's intimidating being a new person walking into a room. How do you get out there and talk to people? So that's across the board. That doesn't matter what generation you're in.
Steve Genton, the chairman of Pulse, similar to Julie's organization, just in 8 minutes, Young Professionals Networking, and I'm also the owner of Pinpoint Promotions and Printing, which is a marketing company. And to add to the communication, which I completely agree about, I would say to be really conscious of your sphere of influence, make sure that you have a very diverse network in terms of from different walks of life. So never be too naive that you know everything. Just try to continually grow. What I can give for advice.
Good advice. I think we've pretty much heard from everyone but you guys right here. North Haven, right? Right. Awesome. Do you guys want to contribute, anything? Like, I guess, what would you say? You're in high school, right? Or what year are you from? Senior. Okay, so you're going to be heading into college. You're dealing with, technology, probably more than a lot of the rest of us do. So I guess, what was your takeaway listening to all the different stuff?
Hi everyone, I'm Christina, and like they said, I'm a senior at North Haven High School. I can relate a lot, especially to the aspect of multitasking, or lack thereof, actually. Last night I was reading a book, Metamorphosis, for my AP Lit class, and I had my phone next to me. And every time it would buzz, I would look over, and then I'd look back to my book, and I couldn't remember what sentence I just read. So I would read the same page at least 2 times over. But there is a do not disturb button on your phone. And so I turned that on, and then my phone doesn't buzz. And I found that it was a lot easier to just read fluently without my phone. And I think that kind of shows that my generation, Generation Edge, does have a lot of distractions. But I think that we are learning along with these distractions and kind of growing from them and adjusting and being able to have this technology and use all of its resources. And I think we're a very fortunate generation to have, access to a wealth of knowledge at the tips of our fingers. But at the same time, it is a burden because, like I said, that AP literature book took me about a half hour longer to read than I should have. But I think that this kind of challenge is able to be overcome. And I think that's what I'm learning in the generation.
It's great. Awesome. All right. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm Karen Johnson. I teach AP Psychology at North Haven Senior High. Christina's one of my students. And I've noticed an awful lot of changes over the years. I've been teaching for over 30 years. And it's a long time. And I've had to roll with it when we watch the changes in the generations. You have to roll with it. And I've been noticing more with this generation how connected they are to technology, to the point where I would see them come in and all of a sudden I'd see phones coming out. If I was talking, I'd notice phones, someone looking at a phone in a pocketbook or someone reaching for a phone, and I'd say, I know they're connected to technology. I don't want to take it away from them. So what I'm going to do is allow them a little time in my class to actually have a 5-minute break so they can get on their phones, because you can see their fingers are itching to see what message someone has sent them that day. And it's very important to them. So I give them some time to do that. And I will allow the use of technology with phones. For example, the kids can use them in class if it's a project that they're working on. So to me, as I've been very happy working for the years I've been at North Haven, because I think the students have taught me a lot about flexibility and adapting, yet trying to keep a high standard as well. So I think I'm very optimistic. I'm a baby boomer, obviously, so I'm very optimistic about how our generation is going to deal with all of the challenges that they're going to meet. And the economy has been a big issue for our kids. It's been very stressful, and they're really trying to work it out and find avenues to help themselves. So I give them a lot of credit. Thank you.
Does anyone else here have anything else to add before we move to Q&A? Go ahead.
Quick thing. We all heard about this Time magazine. They called it the Me Generation. And a lot of that stuff was not necessarily correct, and we've been talking about that today. But the thing that I came away from that magazine article was, towards the end of the article, they said, this is a generation of optimistic entrepreneurs. And I see that in my students. I think it's really true.
Great. Perfect. Thank you, guys. All right, a big round of applause for our panelists. any questions for a specific member up here or just in general, and then, whoever wants to can take it. Just, I guess, come up to the microphones. There's one here and there's one here, so feel free. And the only thing that I will ask is just if we can just try to be concise so we can get in as many people as possible. So we'll start with you.
Okay, my question is for you, Kim. How do you suggest that we as teachers here get our Generation Xers and our Millennial students to take that break to pause and disconnect and unplug so that they do have that kind of reflection time? Because that seems to be the challenge. They are so convinced themselves that they can multitask that they're not stopping and processing, meditating, centering themselves, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Is this on? Can you hear me? Do I need it on? Okay, perfect. That's a great question. And I think, I'm so sorry, tell me your name again.
Karen Johnson.
And Karen Johnson, when she said, it's about adapting, but still having a very high expectation and caliber of what you want to do. And I think I'll tell you that one way that we're doing research on Gen Ed is right now it's a series of focus groups with the kids themselves. I'm sorry, not kids, with the young adults themselves, and then parents, and then teachers, and then camp counselors, so that we can get a sense of camp counselors are really the only people who are around them without technology. So that's why we have that resource. But one of the teachers actually was talking about how as soon as she stopped acting like technology was the enemy, then the kids seemed more relaxed. So, for example, she made a handle, like a Twitter handle for her English class that the students could follow, and she posted some of the stuff, like some of the assignments on there. She would post fun facts and things like that. So she integrated part of their world into the classroom and then drew the boundaries very clearly, where it wasn't like this technology is the enemy and you shouldn't be using it and this is why it's detrimental. It's using the advantages of it, which is she can be connected, they can feel connected to her, their world can be part of their educational experience, and then some of it, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard, is that explaining the why. Because if you're a teacher and you're standing up in front of a bunch of teenagers and you just say, you need to take time to self-reflect, obviously their first question is, why in the world would we have to do that? And so simply being prepared to have an answer about what is the importance of that. And I'll give you a quick example, but it's stepping away from technology and being able to have meaningful face-to-face connection with other people. I love that idea that one of the teachers said that during your breaks you say no technology, force them to interact with each other. We have done huge research initiatives on high potential programs in companies. So measuring who gets put into a high potential program and who doesn't. And it has been proven time and time again that if you are put into a high potential program, it completely changes the trajectory of your career and of your earning potential. And every time, it doesn't come down to ability, it comes down to communication. Can they speak? Can they express what they're trying to do? Can they get people on their side? Can they influence others? And so it's, if you want to explain, you need to put down your technology and practice face-to-face communication with each other. The why is right there. This is how the workforce works. This is how you get into a college if they have an interview. This is how you get ahead. And so just being able to explain that why, because that's the question that they're going to ask. So that would be, did that answer the question?
I want to know how we get them to be silent, to stop.
Oh, how we get them to be silent?
To reflect.
Explaining why. Like, why do they need to reflect? Why do they have, what's the importance of silence? Explaining and figuring out what that explanation is that they'll buy into. Kind of selling it, yeah.
Question over here?
My name is Karen Burke, and I am in the Media Studies Department, and my research right now is on baby boomers and millennials, and the cross-section of civic engagement. So my question is, with the technology that millennials have at their fingertips and use it so much better than us baby boomers, why is it that they're not as civically engaged, and they're not voting, and they're not very concerned with politics in the future? Where do you see themselves in the future with that? What are the consequences?
They feel completely
hopeless for the most part, I would say. That's the number one word that young people usually say. Is that what you said? Yeah. I mean, that's the number one word that we hear young people say in terms of when we're trying to measure political apathy, basically. And they just say, what difference is this going to make? And also the barrier to access has become so low. So for boomers, it was like, you had to get out there. You had to be in the streets. There was energy that really had to be put into it. And for millennials, we can text 4664 to American Red Cross, and then you just donated $10 to Haiti. And it's like, because you don't have that same, you question, am I even doing anything here? And I'm sorry, go ahead, yes.
Is it, because what my research shows it is about getting together, face to face, and making change. And if that's not happening physically, change is slow to happen.
Yeah.
So my concern is if they're electronically together and not physically together, what are the consequences for the future? And do they talk about who will run the country?
Yeah. The good thing about the millennials is that there's 82 million of them, so someone in there is bound to have good leadership skills. That's the hope. But I think that we're starting to see a resurgence of wanting to be physically together. When we talk to teenagers about their relationship with technology, the number one word pattern that we have found so far is the word addiction, which is a negative word. And if you're feeling like that when you're 14, you can't live your whole life like that. And so and just like that do not disturb button, they're going to have to find a way to manage this addiction that exists. And we start already seeing a need for physical resurgence and a wanting to be together to accomplish things. And I think it's part of the human spirit. I think that the media pumps out a lot of information about these kids are robots and they don't want to be with humans and they just want to talk to a machine, and I don't believe that that's true. I think it's part of the human spirit to want to come together to accomplish things. So I don't think it's as alarmist, as maybe we think, as alarming as we think it is. And so I actually don't worry about that too much. I think that the kids who never wanted to do anything are never going to, and the kids that were born to do something great are going to, with or without the help of technology.
I guess my question is probably going to be, maybe it's already been answered, but it's a follow-up to what was just asked. According to the handout, I'd be in the traditionalist group here today, and much of the conversation has been about technology and business here. One of the descriptors for the baby boomers was challenging societal mores, and today Enrique, I think, touched on it a little bit from his viewpoint, but I'd like to know, I'd like to hear from Gen Edgers particularly, or any millennials too, about their thinking on societal mores and their involvement, if they plan to, or maybe they just don't plan to, if they could touch a bit on where they are with what was mentioned here about the baby boomers challenging societal mores. What about Gen Edgers and millennials? What thoughts might there be? Thank you.
Do you guys have any opinions?
So the question, if I'm going to be involved in politics or have an interest in politics or just world change, even if not politics, maybe even just in your own environment. It's on a very local, person-to-person level.
Okay, so I was very fortunate to start working when I was 13 years old at the Land Museum. From there, I met a great gentleman who owns the company that does all the concessions for Mohegan Sun, Excel Center, and it's a really cool job. From there, I'm now at a health insurance agency, and I'm 18 years old. I feel like I have job security. For those around me who haven't had the great mentors that I've been given, I feel like they need a system in place so that they can be raised up and they can learn how to do a handshake and how to look someone in the eye and go into a room and be able to just feel like the room is a great place to be and everyone is your friend and it's just easy. I'm a huge extrovert. It's ridiculous. But so what I would like to do once I build my wealth, I'd like to come back into the New Haven region, or a region where kids aren't as fortunate as myself, and create a mentorship program. And those are just my sentiments for the greater good. If that answers your questions.
Sir, over here.
Hi, I'm Jack, coordinator of Veterans and Military Affairs here on campus. About a month ago, I had my first helicopter of life. Couple of comments. One is, I walk across campus, and I venture to say that 95% of our students have headphones or earbuds in. And, you make eye contact, you want to say hello, and, they can't hear you. And then especially in the fitness center, you need a spot, and they've got headphones on, or you want to ask them if they have if they're done with a piece of equipment, and you have to yell, pretty much, or get in their face. And then last comment is, I like to talk to people. I don't text. I don't know if I ever will. When I get emails asking kind of detailed questions, if they haven't given me a phone number, I ask them for a phone number, because I want to talk to people. Thank you.
Hi, I'm a graduate of the social work program here at Southern, and a problem that we experienced in the social service agency here in Connecticut, and I won't name, of course, after finishing my graduate work at Columbia in administration, I was working very closely with the administrators at this agency, and one of the problems that was widespread was the fact that many of the newer social workers were not acclimated around, well, okay, you need to do this, all right. It was always, well, I'm not sure if that's the way I should handle the situation.
Okay.
And so I just can't say enough about how important this work that you're doing is in terms of just helping people, traditionalists, baby boomers, and people who are out there really, really struggling with issues. It's almost like there are times when you can't sit and explain, to a new worker all of the ins and outs of why decisions are made at the top. And basically what I find from, I finished my doctoral program at UConn recently, and after working for President Obama for 5 years, I'm now trying to get reacclimated. And when I saw this workshop in the newspaper, I said, oh boy, everybody needs this. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. And do we have any more, just like, we probably have time for like one more question? Okay, we'll do two. You and you. So you go first, and then we'll make time.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'll make it quick.
Thank you.
In terms of the political apathy that we're seeing more and more now, it's, at least from my opinion, it's not necessarily a generational thing worldwide, because if you look at, the States, for example, where we live now, there's a lot of political apathy. But if you look at, for example, Egypt, I think it was 1 or 2 years ago, there was a huge riot because of the leadership that was there. The whole world was against it. None of the, other governments really wanted to do anything. But then through Facebook, Twitter, and a bunch of other social medias, everyone kind of said, the young people using that stuff primarily kind of said, let's get together on this day, at this time, at this place. And there were millions of people there. And there's another thing, and that kind of is what ended that thing in Egypt. So then, another example that I know of is Switzerland. There's more people in the younger generation voting there than here, percentage-wise, obviously. And it's a lot of the times because, of the way that their government works, which is kind of, just, it's a direct democracy. So it's completely different. So that's kind of where, there's a huge divide here, where, you see the people saying it's not, what's the difference going to be if I vote or not, economy, people are the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. Is that also, is that also maybe a thing of, with all the technology and everything else, the people who can do all that efficiently, all the studying, learning, and everything, do you think those are the people that may succeed or be able to get those higher up jobs, whereas the lower ones will be obtained by the people who can't necessarily do that? Is that really a...
I just want to respond. Again, my name is Karen Johnson. I think you're going to have to do both. I think you're going to have to be technologically savvy, and I also think you're going to have some strong social skills, which stems from emotional intelligence, which was a very interesting book that came out a few years back, but it talked about how you relate to people, how well you understand yourself, how you can relate your emotions to someone without being confrontational, how to read people's emotions. So I think people are going to have to be able to do both. And I'm glad you mentioned what happened in Egypt, because that certainly was a great example of a technologically motivated revolution. And it caused great changes for the Egyptians. So I think you're going to need to do both. Thank you.
Last question, sir.
Yes, I'm Bob Cudahy. I'm in media technology. My question is, who creates these constructs?
Yeah,
are they opinions? Are they facts? It seems like everybody has like an opinion about these things.
Yeah.
But are they really studied?
Yeah.
And are they looked at through like statistical analysis? And so it just, I think it's fascinating and it's fun to listen to all these ideas.
Yeah.
So who would...
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are curious, the grandfathers of this study, it's Strauss and Howe. And they wrote the original book back in the early 70s, and it's called Generations. It's an incredibly boring, very, very huge, but it's not boring to me, but unless you're like in love with this topic, it's going to be incredibly boring. It's a very, very thick textbook. Is it a construct? As much as all social sciences are constructs. So yeah, it's a construct invented by them. And then it's studied in depth now. I would say probably the biggest program for generational theory in terms of just research is at Harvard. Tammy Erickson is the name of the main generational theorist at Harvard, again, if you're curious. And Daniel Gulati is the guy who writes a lot about it. And is it based in statistics? It's based on a lot of different things. It's based on, I rely heavier on qualitative, because I think that when you're trying to measure the nuances of human behavior and how it changes, you have to speak to humans. So my background, I do more qualitative analysis, but quantitative, and a lot of that is pulled from consumer. So that's saying, all right, millennials, they believe in the green movement. Well, then you have to follow, do they actually spend their money on green products more than baby boomers do? You have to see, where do people spend money? What are the patterns of consumption? So that's one of the science pieces of it. And then it's behavioral patterns, it's voting patterns, it's and it's a lot of interviews, a lot of focus groups, and finding the patterns within that, and the collective memory of groups of people. So that's kind of the scientific backbone of it. Did that answer your question?
What do you think is the big difference between what people think and all this data? Like this is a very huge amount of information.
Yeah, it is. The public opinion of each generation is dictated by the media. If Time magazine comes out with an article that says the millennial generation is the worst generation in the whole world, I can't believe what they do, then people are going to think the millennial generation is the worst generation in the whole world, and I can't believe what they do. And so you have to, that's why I think that the academic backbone of it is important, because you have to, and there's kids in the room, you just talk to people, and you talk to kids about what motivates them and what they're interested in, and why they want to work and what they want to work in, and if they want to get interested in politics. And if you do that with thousands and thousands of people every year, you can start to see some patterns and draw some conclusions.
It seems like there's a big area that people can go into to study.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a social science and social theory, so there's a lot of ways you can take this. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of
course.
Okay, I think that concludes the program, but first of all, I'd like to thank, first of all, the focus group for doing a fine job in helping us today. Thank you to all of you. I know some of you are coming from different parts of the state, and we appreciate you taking the time and energy to be with us today, so thank you. And by the way, once we're done, there are plenty of refreshments in the back, so help yourselves. You're more than happy to take whatever you'd like, take some home, whatever you want to do. And Amanda, thank you for moderating the discussion. Very much, you did a great job. And Kim, what can we say? This has been very informative. And, you know, Kim lives in Minneapolis, so we thought that just as sort of a token of appreciation, a little sweatshirt. It gets cold up there.